Premadasa. We're delighted to announce the arrival of Honorable Sajith Premadasa in our midst. He is the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the leader of Samagi Jana Balavegaya and Samagi Jana Sandhanaya. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to please remain standing for the national anthem of Sri Lanka. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the National Council of Professionals, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to the National Visionary Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, today we've all gathered here with a vision in mind, and that is to chart a strategic course for rebuilding our beloved nation. The National Visionary Summit this evening brings together in the audience dynamic professionals, trailblazing entrepreneurs, and business leaders, and we're so grateful for your presence here with us today. Also joining us today, we have some of the most esteemed thought leaders and visionaries who will be gracing the stage in just a short while and who will inspire us with their insights on how we can drive progress and development in Sri Lanka. As you will all agree, ladies and gentlemen, we are at a pivotal moment in our nation's history. And therefore, today's discussions will certainly open up our minds to new perspectives as we seek to shape a future that is both progressive as well as socially equitable for all Sri Lankans. Now, let me give you a glimpse of what we have in store for you today. We have an enriching agenda in mind, and this includes thought-provoking keynote speeches. We also have a panel discussion featuring some of the most distinguished personalities in the fields of economics, politics, and public service. And while I speak to you about the panel discussion, we will have a QR code on screen right now to enable you to send in your questions for our panelists during that segment. So feel free to scan the QR code if you would like to submit your questions. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we have lots to look forward to this evening. And without further ado, let's now get started. To now deliver the inaugural address, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce to all of you a leader who needs little introduction. He is a true advocate of the people, a visionary committed to the prosperity and well-being of all Sri Lankans. Honorable Sajith Premadasa is a leader of the opposition, leading both the Samagi Jana Balavegaya and Samagi Jana Sandhanaya, which is the largest and most diverse political alliance in Sri Lanka's history. His leadership is marked by a relentless pursuit of economic growth and social justice, always striving to uplift the underprivileged and ensure a brighter future for every citizen of this nation. With an illustrious academic background, Honorable Sajith Premadasa is a graduate of the London School of Economics, and his journey in public service began early, with significant contributions as the Deputy Minister of Health and later as the Minister of Housing, where he spearheaded initiatives that have transformed countless lives. So with this introduction, ladies and gentlemen, to now do the honors of delivering the inaugural address, it's my pleasure to welcome on stage Honorable Sajith Premadasa.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable members of Parliament, distinguished guests who have arrived all the way from India, Mr. T. Krishnakumar, Dr. Montek Singh Aluwalia, champions of Sri Lankan business and enterprises, friends. We stand here today at a defining and pivotal moment, facing decisions that will determine the fate of our generations, the fate of our nation. This is not a time for expediency and short-sightedness. It is a time for courage, vision, and deep commitment. for the greater good of our motherland and of its people. We are a small nation state, yes, but we are a small nation with great resilience and stupendous potential. For years, we have been speaking about our potential. And yes, we did realize some of its fruits on several occasions. The first attempt when we liberalized in the late 70s, and the second at the beginning of the 1990s. Today, we have two very well-known personalities who have helped India change its course from being a low-income, low-growth nation to the fastest-growing major economy in the world. An economy that is so dynamic that every conceivable industry and every major investor is jostling to set up factories there. To us, we believe we could turn our potential into growth and development if we use this opportunity in the most strategic manner. Friends, our competitive advantages, our location, our resources, our people, the strength and the determination and dedication that our people possess must be at the heart of our strategy to achieve and sustain high growth. Yes, of course, stability is necessary. We need low inflation and low interest rates. We need stable exchange rates. We need a stable macroeconomy. We must meet revenue and primary balance targets. We need to accumulate foreign exchange reserves. But what use of all these numbers if we have sparse growth? When South India is growing at almost double digits, the IMF and the government have agreed on a plan to reach a mere 3.1% growth rate by 2029. This would not certainly suffice. It is totally inadequate. We can't get out of our hole with such lethargic and anemic growth. That is why we discussed with the IMF our position on the need to amend the agreement. The current program does not focus on growth. We must align our economy towards growth. Not just growth, but tradable growth. That is exports and internationally competitive import substitution. It is very important when we have prosperity as our target, when we have growth as our target, we must ensure that we attain shared prosperity, that we achieve the objective of equitable growth. Growth where its fruits would be shared and redistributed among all sectors of our society. We have seen time and time again, countries have focused on debt sustainability, but neglected to build a strong foundation for their industries, their people, and their future. Yes, of course, debt sustainability is crucial, but it cannot be the sole focus. If we do not address these underlying core issues of economic growth and equitable distribution, or if I may say redistribution of the fruits of that growth, we risk creating vulnerabilities that could undermine our democracy, resulting in an anarchic situation. Let me assure you that we are firm in our resolve to continue with the reform process. We need reforms across the board, be it in trade, investment policy, or in institutions in the public sector. We must create a more propitious environment for entrepreneurs to grow, for entrepreneurship to thrive. We must create greater ease to start and run a business. We need greater flexibility in the labor market. Our capital market must become a real conduit to match savings with investments. Investors must be able to protect their rights, and the law must be equal to all. Similarly, we need to protect the rights of those who are employed in business enterprises. We are fully cognizant of the responsibilities that lie ahead. Cleaning up corruption and building efficiency in governance is critical. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I and my team are committed to putting in place structures to fight the cancer of corruption, maladministration, and misdeeds. In fact, we will urgently establish an independent public prosecutor's office to remove all political interference in bringing the offenders to book and to prevent anyone from escaping the rule of law. Economic fragility after a bankruptcy deal can contribute to deep social unrest, which in turn can threaten national security. Austerity measures can lead to widespread hardship and a crisis of confidence that can shake the very fabric of our society. There are many cautionary tales, and we would be wise to learn from them. Dear friends, we believe in a social market economy as our primary economic model. But we have also inculcated the principles of social democracy, which will ensure that the capitalism that we practice would be capitalism with a human face. Capitalism, wealth creation, growth that would be enjoyed by all strata in our society. We will ensure that we create wealth while ensuring economic justice. I often hear criticism that I'm too focused on welfare. Let me clarify what I mean by welfare. My vision of welfare is not about mere handouts. It's about investment. It's about empowerment, investing in our people, in our future. Building smart schools, in my view, is one of the best investments that we can make in human resource development. Education is the very foundation of everything. It is the key to unlocking our productivity, our innovation, and our competitiveness on the global stage. An educated population is our greatest asset. And investing in human capital is not just a moral imperative, it is an economic necessity. I would like to remind all of the pioneers in industry and business who are here today about a very famous statement which gained traction. It is as follows: if the few who are rich in society cannot protect the poor who are many, then that system and society is fraught with danger and conflict. We have an incredible economic team. They are knowledgeable, hardworking, and deeply committed to our country's success. And we believe that we are the perfect team to deliver on all fronts: reform, relief, development, growth, poverty alleviation, and empowerment as a whole. Soon, we will launch our updated version of the economic blueprint, named From Stability to Growth. Ladies and gentlemen, we must learn from the past. Same people doing the same thing will not produce different results. And we don't have time to experiment with models that are proven failures. We have a huge responsibility, both as policymakers and as businesses and members of the industry. Let us be pragmatic about our future. We must firmly believe that it is possible to come out of this difficult situation and secure our future. I'm certain together we can overcome. To our esteemed industry leaders and business owners, I want nothing more than to support your growth and ensure that you have everything you need to thrive. An SJB administration is committed to creating an environment that would ensure that businesses can flourish. Let us always think beyond our borders. Let us create economic linkages and relationships that will enable us to gain global competitiveness. Let us join global production networks. Let us become a player in the global economy. I guarantee you, the SJB government will remove all stops and red tape to help your businesses grow, both domestically and in the region and internationally. I would like to thank Mr. Krishna Kumar and Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia who are true champions of this kind of thinking for attending this event. Mr. Krishna Kumar has already introduced many Sri Lankan businesses to India, and I hope you will continue to support Sri Lankan businesses reach the Indian shore. In addition, I would encourage Indian businesses, industry, and entrepreneurs to come and set up shop in Sri Lanka, establish joint ventures that would be mutually beneficial. It will certainly help to provide employment opportunities for the unemployed youth in our country. And if we have an export-oriented focus, it will certainly help us in improving our export levels and thereby providing us with valuable foreign exchange earnings. Dr. Ahluwalia is the brains behind the economic miracle of India with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Last time he was here, members of parliament who belong to the SJB and SJB alliance had the opportunity to have a good discussion on the liberalization program of India. That particular interaction certainly helped our members of parliament to learn about the hard road that India took in restructuring, redefining, and reforming the Indian economy. I hope that this evening will be an opportunity for you to engage with them, to be inspired by the experiences, and to see the endless possibilities that lie before us. Together, we can build a future where our businesses are not just surviving, but thriving, leading the way in innovation and productivity. Let us face our future with confidence. We Sri Lankans are known for our hospitality and beautiful smiles. But soon, we will show the world why we carry a lion in our flag. විශේෂයෙන්ම අද දවසේ අප රටේ ව්‍යාපාරික ප්‍රජාව ව්‍යාපාරික ශාස්ත්‍රයේ සූරීන් වීරීන් මේ අවස්ථාවට සහභාගී වෙලා අපේ රටේ ඉදිරි ආර්ථික ගමන් මාර්ගය පිළිබඳව සුහද සංවාදයකට සහභාගී වීම පිළිබඳව අපගේ ස්තුතිය සහ ප්‍රණාමය පුද කර සිටිනවා. අපි තරයේ විශ්වාස කරනවා අපේ කණ්ඩායම ආර්ථික වෙසනයකට අගාධයකට ලක්වුණු අපේ මාතෘ භූමිය ගොඩගත හැකි දැනුම කුසලතාවය නිපුණතාවය තිබෙන හොඳම කණ්ඩායමයි. විශේෂයෙන්ම මානුෂීය ධනවාදයක් සමාජ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදයක් මුසු කරගෙන රටක් හැටියට ආර්ථික වර්ධනය හරහා අපනයන කේන්ද්‍රීය ආර්ථික වර්ධනයක් තුළින් අපේ රට සෞභාග්‍ය සම්පන්න රටක් ශීඝ්‍ර ආර්ථික වර්ධනයක් ලබන රටක් වර්ධනය වීම තුළ හැමෝම එහි ප්‍රතිලාභ බෙදා හදා ගැනීම වර්ධනය වීම තුළ සමාජ අසාධාරණත්වයෙන් තොරව සමාජ සමානාත්මතාවය තහවුරු වන ආකාරයට ආර්ථිකය වර්ධනය කරන මේ නව චින්තනය මේ නව සංකල්පය මේ මැද මාවත එක පැත්තකින් අන්ත ලිබරල්වාදී ඉහලින් පහලට ප්‍රතිලාභ කාන්දුවන trickle down economics ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරමින් තවත් පැත්තකින් ලෝකයේ කිසිම රටක් සාර්ථක නොවුණු අන්තවාදී සමාජවාදී ක්‍රමවේදයක් බැහැර කරමින් ධනවාදී සංකල්පයේ මානුෂීය ගුණාංග මුසු කරගෙන සමාජ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදය තුළින් තමන් නිර්මාණය කරන රටක් හැටියට නිර්මාණය කරන ආදායම සම්පත සමසේ බෙදා යන සාධාරණත්වයේ යුක්ති ඉෂ්ට සිද්ධ කරන අලුත් මාවතකට අපි ප්‍රවේශ වෙනවා. මේ මාවත තුළ දූෂණයට වංචාවට හොරකමට කිසිසේත්ම ඉඩක් නැහැ. ගජමිතුරු ධනවාදයට පවුල්වාදයට මිතුරු හවුල්වාද හරහා ප්‍රසම්පාදක ක්‍රමවේද බැහැර කරමින් unsolicited proposals හරහා අද දවසෙත් මේ කතා කරන මොහොතෙත් අපේ රටේ ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන අන්ත දූෂිත රාජ්‍ය ගනුදෙනු ක්‍රමය බැහැර කොට මේ රටේ දූෂණය මුලින් උපුටා දැමීමේ ඒ ආර්ථික නිදහස දිනා ගන්නා මෙහෙයුමට ඔබ සියලු දෙනාටම සම්බන්ධ වන්නයි කියලා මම ආරාධනා කරනවා. Let me once again thank all of you, distinguished, renowned audience that have excelled in your respective fields, in industry and business. All of you all are proven successes. And your only wish is for a favorable environment to exist so that your businesses and enterprises can grow. That the usual bureaucratic inertia and the usual obstacles that are there, which constrains ease of doing business, we will ensure that we establish one-stop shops to promote businesses, to promote foreign direct investment, to ensure that there is easy approval of all legitimate and authentic projects that will accrue benefits to both country and to businesses. Thank you very much and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you very much to Honorable Sajith Premadasa for that very insightful address. And we do appreciate Honorable Premadasa's vision for rebuilding this nation, as well as his commitment to uplifting the lives of all Sri Lankans. Ladies and gentlemen, as we now continue through today's discussions on strategic growth and national development, it's my pleasure to introduce to all of you our very first keynote speaker today. Mr. T. Krishnakumar is one of India's most esteemed corporate leaders. He began his career at Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverages, eventually rising to the position of President of Coca-Cola India and Southwest Asia. Mr. Krishnakumar's strategic insight and leadership have been instrumental in driving growth and innovation across various sectors. Currently, he serves as the head of the FMCG sector at Reliance Ventures. With his deep understanding of market dynamics and his proven track record in building and leading successful teams, he brings a wealth of knowledge as well as expertise to today's conversation on strategic growth. So with this introduction, ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure now to invite our very first keynote speaker to take stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. T. Krishnakumar.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Sajith Premadasa, Honorable Members of Parliament, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, esteemed businessmen and business professionals of Sri Lanka, I am truly humbled with this invitation to speak to you. And it possibly is something which I was not prepared for, but I will nevertheless do that. See, Sri Lanka has been a country I've been coming pretty often for many years of my life. And so I will talk out of experience. I'm not an economist like Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. I'm a business person who looks at opportunities economies give to further business, thereby adding value to the economy. So I feel we are at a juncture where the best positioned nation to take advantage of the India growth story is really Sri Lanka. I talk this out of experience of knowing a reasonable amount of the strengths of the Sri Lankan business and having a reasonable idea of the opportunities in India. So bear with me as I take you through why this could be a good opportunity for Sri Lanka as well as for India to partner and grow each other well. I think we as countries have had historical connections. I think historical records talk a lot about a lot of things came from India to Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka to India. We as countries have good cultural ties. We are a multi-religious society, multi-language society, and we have managed it very well. We have had economic relations which are pretty good. In fact, there is a very strong FTA in place between the two countries, which I believe Sri Lanka has not really very heavily leveraged. While Indian companies have started making investments in Sri Lanka in some of the infrastructure areas, but that the potential for attracting Indian investment is pretty significant. Having said all this, I want to take a few minutes to tell you about where India is today. I suppose Dr. Montek will give you much more details, but I'm telling you what's relevant for Sri Lankan business. India is poised to become the third largest economy in the world. It's set in 2027, but give a year or two, it doesn't make a difference. It's an industry, it is an economy which is expected to grow upwards of 6% at least, and the growth rate for 23-24 was 7.6%, and the previous year was 7%. In 2023, India's GDP was estimated to be 3.4 trillion. Why is this happening? I think India really was pretty inward looking till the famous duo really opened up the economy. And after that, it has benefited from multiple mega factors. I think the first mega factor in my view was rewiring itself to be part of global supply chains and having a set of economic measures which created strong domestic demand. This created a very strong middle class, and one of the strengths of the Indian economy is that there is very significant growth in domestic consumption. In fact, retail and consumer market in India has been growing rapidly. Retail market is projected to grow 9% and move from the 2019 number of about 779 billion to 1.4 trillion in the year 2026. Just look at the size of the opportunity it throws up to all the industry in Sri Lanka. This is being fueled in India by a rapidly growing middle class, whose purchasing power is increasing by the year, driving a range of preferences. Now, India at one time was known to be the mass market where everybody had to sell at pretty affordable prices. It's slowly moving to become one of the largest premium market in every industry. Most people don't recognize that the affluent population of India is almost the size of Europe, while there is now a lot of people who are below at the bottom of the pyramid as well. Now, this has been well leveraged by many Indian companies, and one of those companies which has leveraged it very well is Reliance. We have set up a pretty strong retail network. In fact, we have retail network in literally every area of business, from food and grocery to lifestyle to electronics and other key retail segments. Why is it important for industry in Sri Lanka? It's just not us. India has a very well-developed retail and distribution network, which gives you access to such a massive market. And just to put things in perspective, in the area of consumer goods, India is slowly going to become $100 billion. This presents huge opportunity for all global brands, and Sri Lanka will, and I'll tell you why later why it is very attractive for the Sri Lankan industry. And then I'll stop here about India. We look at Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is coming back and is expected to grow by a single-digit growth rate in the next few years. Now, if you have to really drive the growth, you need to really look at how can you leverage your neighbor who is growing pretty rapidly. Just to give you a perspective, and I discussed this with some of the Sri Lankan companies who meet, in every category of business, I'm taking the example of biscuits, for instance, because we have a relationship with Maliban in Sri Lanka. The growth of India in absolute terms is equivalent to the size of the Sri Lankan market today. So if we really make an attempt to either produce and export to India or manufacture in India or find ways of taking advantage of this, this really puts every company in any industry with a potential of doubling, tripling their growth, and which ultimately can have a real fantastic effect on the Sri Lankan economy. Now, I think there are multiple ways by which we can get this going to ensure that finally both countries benefit. While India has this 1.4 billion population and hence a proportionate market size, I think the difficulty is to break through and get into the distribution system, which is massive. In fact, to give you a perspective, India has 8 to 9 million small mom and pop stores who contribute to 90% of the total business. Organized retail contributes to 10%. So it is important for Sri Lankan companies to understand how they would break through this barrier. So partnerships are important. The second big opportunity of India is literally all raw materials are available in India. And they're available at competitive prices thanks to India rewiring itself to be competitive globally in many of these areas. So I personally believe it's a great opportunity if mutual relationships are made by Sri Lankan companies with good Indian companies, which will give them access to the distribution system, which will give them access to really being able to source raw materials at competitive prices because it's next door. So my view is that there are three ways by which this collaboration can happen. One can look at joint ventures because Indian companies are constantly looking for supply partners who can supply into India in a competitive manner to take advantage of this growth, or creating enterprise in India which can produce in India. In fact, I think we are doing both. We have partnered with Maliban to really start making Maliban products in India, but at the same time, we are also trying to get products from Maliban and working out methods by which we can make the product in Sri Lanka and take it back. So the second option, I personally believe, is that to set up manufacturing facilities which can service the Indian growth. Again, you need partnership with Indian companies who can help you get access to this market. I'm sure over a period of time you could do it yourself, but in the initial stage, the scale of investment in go-to-market is so high that it is good to have a partner. And this I call as the manufacturing partnership. The first one would be a brand partnership where you work with people to take your brand in. The second could be a manufacturing partnership because the advantage of Sri Lanka is you have access very easily to global raw materials and you have a lot of incentives in terms of the FTA with India, and this can be done. And we have done this, for instance, In our business, we source a whole lot of beverages from Sri Lanka. It is made in Sri Lanka. The raw materials got from various parts of the world, including India, and then it is brought back to India and sold. See, in conclusion, whatever I have seen is that the Sri Lankan companies have high quality products, which are comparable to global quality. They have excellent ability to innovate. They have good systems and practices. Having run a plant in Sri Lanka, I know that it can be run to global standards of excellence. It has got a mature presence in many of the consumer product categories. I mean, innovation has happened and we have products which are available in the rest of the world now. Now, all this can be easily leveraged with the neighbor because India provides massive scale. Scale where you can add several lines in Sri Lanka and it can get sold out. Or several lines in India which not only gives scale to the Sri Lankan business, but also a launch pad for exports to any part of the world. Because scale is what really makes you super competitive. Secondly, I think the stability in terms of demand in India is much more at this point of time. It has been in the last 20 years. We have had ups and downs in the economy, but the stability of demand has never dropped below high single digit, which really makes a business quite safe. Thirdly, I think with this collaboration, you would get more competitive in terms of cost of manufacturing. Because at the end of the day, if your line runs full out and your demand is guaranteed, scale gives its own production efficiencies, which will come in. And this combination of using the India growth will also make Sri Lanka more competitive from an export perspective. Because if you are successful in creating these alliances or joint ventures, then I think what our honorable leader of the opposition said could become a reality with Sri Lanka becoming the manufacturing base for several of these big joint ventures to export to all parts of the world. And for that, I think a lot of effort has to be put in. I want to conclude with making this point. I think I have always wondered for the last, say, about 15 years, why is it that Sri Lankan companies have not been able to fully leverage the neighbor, which is growing well, and number two, with whom they have a good FTA? One of the things I feel is the sort of effort that is required to really understand how to enter this country and start really working towards taking advantage of it is quite a lot. And that, I believe, is an entry barrier. And what I would possibly counsel all of you is to really pick up people, the companies in India who are like-minded, who can help you through the first process. Because once you break that barrier, I'm sure you will find the going will be very, very easy. But it's the first 12 months barrier because India is a country in name, but it's a continent when it comes to consumer preferences. It varies every state, so it's important for you to get some help in terms of the entry strategy. So this is what I have learned from my interactions with the Sri Lankan companies, as well as taking some of these companies to India. I believe, and I truly believe that this is a partnership which can really create a very, very strong position for both countries in this part of the world. And I take this opportunity to again thank the organizers for inviting me. And I want to assure most of the businesses who are interested in looking at India that me and my team will be very happy to help you, because I want to see the day when Sri Lanka becomes a big manufacturing hub for the Indian economy, as well as a big strategy. Sri Lankan businesses become big strategic partners for the Indian companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. T. Krishna Kumar for sharing with us your valuable insights. And I'm sure we all agree his perspectives gave us much to ponder about as we explore the future of our nation's economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to delve deeper into this theme of strategic growth. And with that in mind, it's my honor to introduce to you our next distinguished speaker. Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia is a towering figure in the field of economics, not just in India, but globally. A former deputy chairman of the Planning Commission of India, Dr. Ahluwalia has played a pivotal role in steering the Indian economy through significant reforms and liberalization. His career is marked by his commitment to fostering sustainable and inclusive growth, addressing inequality, and implementing economic policies that have had a lasting impact. A Rhodes Scholar with a distinguished academic background from Oxford University, Dr. Ahluwalia has also served in key roles at the World Bank and as an economic advisor to the Ministry of Finance in India, among many other pivotal positions. His collaboration with Dr. Manmohan Singh in reforming India's economy is particularly noteworthy, making him one of the most respected economists of our time. Ladies and gentlemen, with this introduction, it's now my pleasure to invite on stage Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia.
Distinguished and honorable members of Parliament, other distinguished guests. Let me begin by saying that I'm really delighted to be invited by the Professionals Association to participate in this National Vision Seminar. You know, I have many friends in Sri Lanka. I've had the opportunity to visit 3 or 4 occasions, and I keep an eye on what's happening next door, because I think that both our countries can learn a lot from each other. And when I received this invitation, I said, well, what is it that you would like me to talk about? And what they said was, why don't you talk about lessons from India, India's reform, which might be relevant for Sri Lanka today. Now, you know, that's always nice to look back, and it feels good to have someone say, well, look, you have some lessons to offer, but I do want to introduce a word of caution. And the caution is that, you know, each country is different. So usually in the old days, the IMF and the World Bank were often criticized for a kind of cookie-cutter approach, a sort of one-size-fits-all. And that, of course, is wrong. But at the same time, there are lessons. So one can look at the lessons from India and then have a somewhat separate decision. How much of this is really relevant and applicable for Sri Lanka? And in the latter, I mean, I'm obviously not the best qualified to pronounce, but you're a group of professionals, so I'm proposing to put these things, if you like, in a somewhat provocative way, hoping that you will think about it and try to absorb and somehow reflect that in what you think should be the right policies to follow. Now, first, 4 important cautions about why mechanical comparisons between India's reforms, which began in 1991, and what Sri Lanka is now going to do may not be, well, they're always relevant, but you need approach them with caution. First, you know, the attitude, intellectual attitude to globalization, liberalization, and opening up in 1991 was very different from what it is today. In 1991, it was a no-brainer. I mean, we in India were the outside guys. I mean, we were not doing what other people were doing. Communism had collapsed in 1989-90. The Soviet Union pretty much self-destructed in December of 1991. And within India, the left has intellectually always been important, but the fact that the influence of communism in Europe and, for that matter, in the Soviet Union declined sharply made it a lot easier to make the case that, look, opening the economy and globalization is the way to go. By contrast, right now, the global atmosphere is totally different in the sense that the very countries that laid the basis for an open global economy appear to be walking a bit backwards and introducing all kinds of restrictions as a result of the polarization that is taking place in the world. And that is a big difference. My own view is that while it is regrettable that the world is getting polarized, I still think it makes sense for countries in our region to remain open. The opportunities to integrate with the world in Asia are going to be the best of any part of the rest of the world. So in that sense, Sri Lanka is located in a part of the world that is not likely to be too much fractured. That's point number one. Point number two is the state of the global economy. You know, when India liberalized in 1991, it was a period when the global economy was growing and global trade was also growing quite rapidly. Right now, in parallel with the intellectual change that's taking place, there's a slowing down in the global economy and certainly a slowing down in world trade. So that is also a difference. But then, as I said earlier, Sri Lanka needs to look at what are the trends going to be in South Asia and East Asia. I think those trends are not going to be towards extreme polarization and fractionalization. There will be some movement on the part of global supply chains away from China, but and there may even be a bit of a shrinkage of global trade. But on the whole, I think given the size of Sri Lanka, the logic of remaining open and benefit from it is very strong. And certainly I think that's true of India also. In fact, we argue in India that while global trade policy is sort of trying to shift global value chains away from China, that's an opportunity for India if we can sort of step in as an alternative. Now, quite frankly, if we succeed in doing that, then that success is the benefit to Sri Lanka also. Because if India, in order to succeed, India will have to remain open. In fact, my view is we're not as open as we should be, and we should open up further. So that means you have next to you a fairly large country, a very large market. I mean, Mr. Krishna Kumar gave some very compelling comparisons that with such a large country, if we do well in India, and we're certainly trying to, and remain open, which we have to, although there are voices every now and then saying, look here, if the rest of the world is closing, why don't we do the same thing? That's wrong, and I hope that we won't follow that route. For Sri Lanka, the environment remains favorable to embrace openness. Two other differences which I think are relevant. You know, one is India ran into a serious current account crisis, but it didn't have an external debt crisis. So from our point of view, if you could fix the current account, the outstanding foreign debt was very small. That's not the case for Sri Lanka, and therefore the debt restructuring exercise that you have negotiated becomes very important. Now, the repayments due on that foreign debt are only going to begin a couple of years from now. So some of the tests of whether the adjustment you're trying succeeds, you'll have to wait and see. But it's something to keep at the back of one's mind. It only means, however, that you need to position yourself such that when those repayments begin, there's confidence that Sri Lankan economy is on the move and that its exports are also improving. And that will essentially make it relatively easier either to restructure a little bit more or refinance the debt or something. I think it's very important when looking at this in an open economy to appreciate the role of confidence. You know, during the East Asian crisis in 1997, there was one thing often said which struck me as very crucial. And what was said was, you know, confidence grows at the rate a coconut tree grows, and it falls at the rate a coconut falls. So it is very, very important as one goes through an economic restructuring to make sure that confidence is maintained. Because a decline or a disappearance of confidence can be a very sudden thing. And that's why it becomes very important to put across a sustained message so that people feel that, yes, the government and the country are behind the restructuring which they're talking about. And I think the vision outlined by the Honorable Sajith Premadasa, to my mind, is completely correct. Currently, the growth rates that are being envisaged are really very modest. I would hope that it should be possible to do better than that. Because unless you do better than that, it's unlikely that you will generate enough employment to satisfy the needs of the large number of young people that are getting added to the labor force. And you know, if India is growing at 7%, let's say, it's not impossible to think that Sri Lanka would be doing better than 3%. I mean, historically, you've grown at roughly similar rates to India, and there's no reason why you shouldn't. But for that, one thing is crucial, that in the reform program, the economy is opened up. This is actually a controversial issue. I mean, it's easy to say, but you know, when you get used to import substitution policies, you will find that people will say that opening up hurts certain people, certain groups, certain industries. You know, the fact is that if we are restructuring the economy to move from a low growth to high growth, it's not going to be a restructuring that will have no adverse effect. That kind of thing is not possible. It's not possible to go into a society and say to the larger group that, look, you've been growing at 2.5% or 3%. We're now putting in place policies where the country will grow at 6 and 7%. And what it means is every single activity that is currently being done will grow faster. Actually, what it means is we need to restructure the activities. New activities will grow rapidly and older activities will shrink. Now, you know, this is ultimately requires political genius, and this is where neither businessmen nor economists can actually help. Very often, people know what needs to be done. But you know, President of the European Commission, former President of the European Commission, Claude von Juncker, he became famous several years ago when he said, "We all know what needs to be done. We just don't know how to get re-elected if we do it." And you know, we find this in India all the time. I mean, we are full of, there are very few people in India who actually disagree with what's wrong. The problem is fixing it requires not just technical knowledge, it requires an act of political genius. Somebody has to be persuading people that, look, it's going to be all right, we look after you, we look after the poor. That is very crucial. In 1991, Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he announced the economic reforms, he made it very plain that the reforms are not going to be done without regard for the impact on the poor. And we will have elements of our policy which will ensure that benefits go to the poor, and those should be well identified. And I think they have to be fitted in to an overall strategy. But you know, not every business that grew up under import substitution is going to flourish if you transit to an open economy. What's going to happen is that other businesses will come up which will do even better, and those who are displaced from one part of the economy will get absorbed in the other part of the economy. And I think that is really what has to drive the broader notion of change. And I mean, you have a tough job to do on the fiscal side. I've looked at the numbers, and you know, Sri Lanka's tax ratios are quite low, and most of the projections that the institutions have made call for a significant rise in the tax ratio. You know, this needs to be put across publicly, and perhaps people need to be aware that this is an end result that you want. In other words, you can't sort of say, we want to have an increase in the tax ratio, but we're going to do nothing about the tax system. You can argue exactly what to do. You can argue that you don't necessarily need to raise rates, you need to widen coverage, whatever, but the debate has to acknowledge that the tax ratio has to go up. Now, quite honestly, if the tax ratio doesn't go up, it's not likely that you can achieve the rest of what you want to do. Because if you want to protect the poor, expenditures directed towards the poor cannot go down. So therefore, this has to be a very big part of it. The other I would say is that, you know, I believe, I was told that the cabinet has cleared a national tariff policy. Now that would basically reduce customs duties over time. Sri Lanka has very high customs duties because of its following an import substitution policy, and those have to go down. You know, I think we need to recognize that elsewhere, this is what we did in India, we were able in the initial period to reduce customs duties because we also managed a flexible exchange rate. So in other words, if the duties go down and the exchange rate depreciates a little, then it compensates the import substituting industry. Because while they get lower duties, they get a higher exchange rate, and that helps them. And of course, the exporters get a big benefit. You know, when reforms were going on in India, I'd very often hear our politicians, I don't know whether Sri Lankan politicians have the same view, but our politicians very often say, criticize the government, you know, look at what's happened to the exchange rate. The rupee has weakened. We want the rupee to be strong as a rock, like the Himalayas. This was one quotation. And you know, on the technical side, we try to persuade the political leadership that, you know, it's correct to say that a strong economy is reflected in a strong exchange rate. I mean, if the economy is strong, they have better export performance, and most likely the exchange rate will appreciate. But if the economy is weak and you simply hold the exchange rate strong, you're only making the economy weaker. It is not correct to say that a strong exchange rate leads to a strong economy. It is correct to say the other way around. So the name of the game should be, let's work to making the economy strong, and if we succeed in due course, the currency will also become stronger. But while the economy is weak, it makes a lot of sense to keep the currency weak. And you know, this is what developed countries also did. You know, in the 1980s, I mean, the Americans put a lot of pressure on the Japanese because they felt that the Japanese were exporting everything to America, and they wanted the Japanese to appreciate their currency because the dollar being a reserve currency, they said the only way we can achieve a depreciation of the dollar is you appreciate your currency. Similarly, when the Chinese did so well in world trade, the American view was that they're doing well because they're keeping the exchange rate artificially low and lots of pressure that you shouldn't do that. So I think from a relatively closed economy to a relatively open economy, lowering of customs duties is desirable, bringing in foreign direct investment is desirable, and it ought to be combined with flexibility on the exchange rate because these things work together. So with those words, let me just make one last point, and that is not everything you envisage will happen. I mean, I don't have the time. I see it flashing red already. Many things we thought we would do, and we weren't able to do them in time. And one or two of them we haven't been able to do even now. But you know, if you have a credible set of steps, I don't think the world expects that you do everything. But the world will expect that, look, these were credible steps, and they've certainly done quite a bit in some of them. That's what leads to confidence. So I think it's very important that you have a well-defined set of policy objectives that is well discussed in the public, amongst the professionals, so that it's understood, and also that delivery, if not 100%, is at least very substantial. That was what we learned. I think we did quite well at the moment, and we hope we should do even better, and maybe we will, but we'll find out. But certainly I think Sri Lanka is well positioned at this point to make that transition in spite of many of the negative things you may hear about the global economy and global attitudes. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now move into our panel discussion where we bring together a distinguished group of leaders and experts who will share their perspectives and engage in conversation on our theme of strategic growth. To moderate this discussion, we are honored to have with us Mr. Kusum Vijaytilaka. I'd like to invite our moderator to come take his seat on stage as I introduce him to you. Mr. Kusum Vijaytilaka has 15 years of experience in corporate management, having worked in corporate finance in the banking sector for 11 years. In addition to his corporate role, he's also media presenter, writer, researcher, commentator, regularly appearing as a resource person on national television. He's currently a policy advisor to the leader of the opposition. Joining our moderator on stage are our panelists. I'd like to invite our first panelist to join us up right now. Dr. Nishan Dimel. We invite you to please join us. Dr. Nishan Dimel is the Executive Director of Verite Research, a Colombo-based, non-partisan think tank providing analytical research and advisory services on economic, political, and legal issues in Sri Lanka and Asia. Dr. Dimel holds a master's and doctoral degrees in economics from the University of Oxford, UK, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from Harvard University, USA. Our next panelist is Mr. Sujiva Senasinghe. We invite him to please join us up. A lawyer by profession, Mr. Sujiva Senasinghe has served as the Deputy Minister of Justice, State Minister of Trade and Investment, and Non-Cabinet Minister of Science and Technology. He played a key role in crafting Sri Lanka's national export strategy and currently serves as Senior Vice President of Samagi Janabalawegaya, as well as Head of the Presidential Campaign Management. Our next panelist is Honorable Harshana Rajakaruna. We invite our next panelist to join us up. Honorable Harshana Rajakaruna was a senior investment advisor before becoming an active member of Parliament. He is the Deputy Whip for the Opposition of Sri Lanka, Deputy Treasurer for Samagi Janabalawegaya, and the Chairman of the Young Professionals Organisation. He holds a BA Honours in Management Studies from the University of Nottingham and an MBA from the University of Wales, Cardiff. We move on to our next panelist, Honourable Iran Vikramaratne. We invite Honourable Iran Vikramaratne to now join us on stage. Honorable Iran Vikramaratne holds a BSc in Economics and Politics and an MSc in Economics from the University of London. An Eisenhower Fellow, he has served as the Vice President of Citibank and was involved in the founding of NDB Bank and became its CEO. He was also founder chairman of the Information Communication Technology Agency, or ICTA. He was also former State Minister of Finance, and he is now the Member of Parliament of Sri Lanka. Joining us up next are our keynote speakers who you've already been introduced to. We'd like to now invite Mr. T. Krishnakumar to please join us up on stage. And he will, of course, be joined by Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who is already on stage. And now, our final panelist, ladies and gentlemen, the leader of the opposition, the leader of Samagi Jana Balavegaya and Samagi Jana Sandhanaya, we invite Honorable Sajith Premadasa.
Dinava minde heta dina itihasa gatai verambuma mage rata balaganvannata sarasen diyunuwa yali kendannata sarasen samagiya balaganvaniti sarasen Sri Lanka Vamadirian Saracen Pirisidu Kalim Taritaya Rakagena Nokiliti Atin Ratakun Karavana Subaheta Samarena Vina Vina Itihasa Gatai Verambuma Magerata Balagan Vandata Saracen Diyunuwa Yali Kendam Nata Saracen Samagiya Balagan Vaniti Saracen Sri Lanka Vamadirian Saracen
And with that, we are ready now to begin with our panel discussion. It's over to our moderator, Mr. Kusum Vijaytilaka.
Thank you very much, Trishma. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Welcome to the panel discussion. I know we've just finished a long weekend, and your presence here is much appreciated after that. I know it's not always easy to come for an economic forum after a long weekend in Sri Lanka. So thank you for being here. I just want to point out, I know we have a very splashy production today and a fantastic setup, an amazing group of panelists. But I think beneath the exterior here, we have a very deep and meaningful discussion. And it's also one of the most important discussions we can have, because this is the year that Sri Lanka must start moving up and moving out of this stage of our financial and economic crisis. So this is an essential part of the future policies that Sri Lanka will have to get us out of the mess that we ourselves have got ourselves into. So I won't keep you long. I will make a deal with the audience. I think it's 8 o'clock right now. So I'll try to let you go before 10. No, I'm joking. We'll keep things a little shorter than that. I know we have two gentlemen from across the strait from India here. It would be a great opportunity to discuss the cricket, but unfortunately we are here for slightly more serious business. I think this is the only opportunity in the year that Sri Lankans would like to discuss cricket with the Indians. So I will direct the first question. So ladies and gentlemen, we've received quite literally hundreds of questions from you, the audience, so thank you very much for your interaction. I can no longer take any more questions, but please send them on, because we'll have more panels in the future and we'd like to see and hear from you all. I also invite the panelists today to keep our discussion moving along. We'll have the answers as succinct as possible, but also feel free to jump in at any moment if you feel you have anything to add to any of the questions. I'm a very easygoing moderator, so I won't hold you up for interrupting anyone else. But let's try to not interrupt the other speakers, but also interject if you need to make a point. And please have an open discussion amongst the panelists as well as towards the audience. So the first question I'll direct to Dr. Ahluwalia, if you don't mind, sir. You mentioned the global context that we are in right now. You mentioned, for example, some of the Western countries and their protectionism, industrial policies that they're going on. So, in short, the global economic context is challenging. Just a few weeks ago, we saw markets across the world reacting to the US jobs reports and questions of a recession. Now, the United States is one of our main trading partners as well. How do you see the upcoming global economy and the trajectory of the global economy? And how does Sri Lanka manage our exit from this crisis and into a growth spurt, considering the global context?
Well, on the global economy, I think there are different views, but everybody emphasizes that there are downside risks. So you can't rule out, but most people think that the US is not likely to have a hard landing. It may slow down a little bit, that's happening. And it's true that global trade might also slightly slow down. But Sri Lanka is such a small part of global trade that I really don't think that should alter Sri Lanka's own strategy. In fact, you have a long way to go in actually making your own strategy more trade-oriented. The fact that the global trade may slightly slow down will not affect the ability to increase your share in that trade, providing you adopt these policies.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ahluwalia. Dr. Nishandimal, would you like to come in on that question? Because Sri Lankan policy has to react not just to the IMF program and the debt restructurings and our own issues with our economic policy, but also to the external environment. So how would you advise policymakers on that?
Kusum, it's been an issue for a while that Sri Lanka's trade and especially its exports, because of what we produce, has been focused in the European markets and the US market, which are markets that are growing slowly and also don't have the diversified interests in Sri Lankan products. So I think an obvious thing to think about responding to the situation is to focus on markets closer to us. India is growing faster than ever. Bangladesh is, so much so that they are set currently on the IMF projections to overtake Sri Lanka's per capita GDP by 2028 for the first time since independence. So if these markets are growing faster, then we have an opportunity, I think, to redirect what we produce and the markets that we focus on, and that's a way for Sri Lanka to go forward. So it's very important that Sri Lanka thinks dynamically about how it is going to get growth, not simply repeating the actions of the past, but looking for new opportunity. And I think the good thing for Sri Lanka that Montek has outlined as well is that Sri Lanka is in a region that is doing much better than the rest of the world.
May I also address this question to Mr. Krishna Kumar? In your experience working for Reliance Industries and previously in your career at Coca-Cola, how have you managed the risks of external market conditions in your internal projections? How do you adjust when there's volatility in a global market? Because Sri Lanka depends so much on our exports. But if our export markets are volatile, we might be in a little bit of trouble. So could you give us some ideas on this?
See, I think I agree with you, but I subscribe to the point that the region per se is not going to do so badly. I mean, India, I don't see any chance of it really terribly slowing down. I think the growth will be sustained. And Bangladesh has been an economy which has been constantly moving in. So I think what is important is for Sri Lanka to understand what its strengths are in using these opportunities which are there, which are growth driven. And that is something which I think in my previous organization we used to do, because it was one of the most global organization. You take it or leave it at any point of time, 50% of the world is not okay. 25% of the world is just sort of okay, and 25% of the world is very good. So how do you maximize that 25%, hold your head above in the rest of the 25% and really manage the risk of the balance 50%? That's the game. When you get into a global business, you're never going to have everything right across the world. And that is where even in my address, I said that the opportunity for Sri Lanka is really in this region, which is India, Bangladesh, definitely big markets.
Thank you, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, Sri Lanka is undergoing our 17th IMF program at the moment. Now, India also has some experience with the IMF. There's some 7 programs that the India has done historically. But your last program was in the early 1990s. So since the 1990s, India has not had to have any major borrowings from the IMF. So before I bring in the leader of the opposition, I just want to ask Dr. Ahluwalia if you can give us some tips on how India managed to stay away from the IMF. For now, it's been close to 30 years that you haven't really had to approach the IMF. Despite all the challenges that India has had, how have you managed to stay away from our dear friends at the IMF?
Well, thanks. I mean, I think the dominant reason is that, in terms of macroeconomic stabilization, having had the problem in 1991, the government was made very conscious of the fact that if you allow the macroeconomics to get out of control, then you become very vulnerable. And I think successive governments in India have been aware of that fact. And they've also, I mean, we put in all kinds of things like a Fiscal Responsibility Act and this and that. These things never work perfectly, but they are a guide. And when you put that in, and if your fiscal deficit goes beyond the limit, then signals start going within and people start warning. And the rest of the world warns that, look, I mean, do you want to downgrade? We were every government in India since 1991 has been very concerned that there should be no downgrading of India. In fact, our current feeling is it now should be upgraded, given that the rest of the world is in so much difficulty, and maybe it will be. But I think sound macroeconomic management is what prevents you from getting to the IMF, being pushed to the IMF. Remember, the IMF is not something that you go to because your growth rate is low. I mean, if your growth rate is low, that's bad. But if your macroeconomics is stable, then you don't have to go to the IMF. Your real challenge is how do you raise the growth rate? And you don't raise the growth rate by destabilizing the macroeconomic. You do the kind of economic reforms and investment reforms and other policy changes that will raise the growth rate.
Thank you, sir. May I just push that question to the leader of the opposition? Dr. Ahluwalia talks about, strong fiscal management. So can the leader of the opposition give us a little bit of an idea into how a future SJP government will manage the fiscal equation with the risks that we have in Sri Lanka? We've had so many decades of a negative fiscal position. So how would an SJP government go about this?
As far as fiscal policy is concerned, we are very well aware of the constraints, limitations, and the fiscal space that exists. We have to be much more strategic in allocating funds, what aspects we are going to prioritize. We have to make sure that we invest resources and funds which will provide the country and its people with a positive rate of return. So as far as fiscal policy is concerned, it is something that we have to manage very carefully and very scrupulously. Having said that, I would like to take this opportunity to negate some of the false propaganda that has been thrown around of the fact that some sort of instability will be created if we come into power, because in fact we hope to renegotiate the IMF agreement. First thing is that I want to allay any fears that one may have. We are going to work within the system. The international economic order of the day dictates that we work with the existing international financial institutions in order to ensure that Sri Lanka as a country extricate itself from this situation of disaster. So we will work with the IMF. Working with the IMF does not mean that we do a poor negotiation, that we forget the expectations, the desperate situation that the people face, and we take the human factor out of the equation and we do a very technical negotiation. That should not be the case. When negotiations take place, we have to take in the human factor. So, we will work with the IMF and we will work towards a renegotiation. And we have every right to do so, because we will be going for a renegotiation with a people's mandate. This particular IMF agreement was achieved through an administration that came into power through a very warped mandate, lopsided mandate. The very same who were responsible for taking Sri Lanka into bankruptcy voted in an interim leadership. And unfortunately, the mandate that was provided for this administration, it's a lost mandate. It's an irrelevant mandate. So a deal that has been negotiated through a warped mandate is not something that we are going to stand by. But of course, we will work with the IMF, we will work with the international financial institutions, and we will ensure that stabilization is one of a number of priorities, but stabilization with growth, not stabilization achieved through constricting the economy, making lives small, making the economy small. That's not the way to go. We fervently believe that we have to grow ourselves out of the problem. Now, a lot of utterances are made about achieving normalcy. Normalcy at what cost? Normalcy at the cost of more than 260,000 micro, small and medium-sized enterprises closing down, millions joining the unemployment line, many youth leaving the country. So we will strive to achieve stability through growth, and we will ensure that our fiscal policy and the monetary policy would be balanced and dictated by achieving sound macroeconomic targets and microeconomic targets. We cannot forget the microeconomy that consists of households, individuals, businesses and firms, and just solely focus on the macro figures.
Thank you, sir. Before we shift to the topic of renegotiation, I just want to bring in Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Eran Vikramaratne, on this question. Because of the IMF targets, there is a distinct focus on the fiscal equation. But I wonder if, because of our external debt issue, shouldn't there be just as much focus on the trade deficit? So I wonder if you can just comment on that on this within the context of the fiscal management issue?
I think I would want to say something that Dr. Ahluwalia said. Sri Lanka is a small country, and the numbers certainly look big for us in the context. But I look at it like this. I think that it's a small country, and it could be fixed. Fixing the trade issue is not by restriction. I'm completely with what Dr. Ahluwalia and Mr. Krishna Kumar said, is that we have to open out. We have to open out. All these restrictions that we have put on imports, particularly in terms of production, these things have to go. When they did this in India, one of the lessons there was that there was opposition, and he hinted at that. There were some industries got together, they formed a club, and, they were saying opening up will cause problems and arguing the case of protection and things. I think we had to break out of that mindset, basically. We have ticked all the IMF boxes at the moment, but we have ticked it at tremendous cost. Because some of the cost is what the leader of the opposition just said. One was that the poverty rates have really, really shot up. Small and medium industries, lakhs of those have actually closed down. So it has come at a cost. The boxes have been ticked. I think we had to get into the growth phase. And therefore, I think there are lots of opportunities. We have said global slowdown, but the South Asian story is different. Understand the trends that are there, use the trends to go this route. Lots of examples I can give. We looked at tourism. We have for decades said there's a season in tourism because our tourists were mainly coming from Europe and coming from the US. This country can be a 365-day tourist destination. If Asia is growing, why not? We had to really look at this, and we had to be very hopeful. We are not negative about this. The situation is bad, but we have to go this route. I would just say one thing that both the speakers didn't touch on, which I saw as a difference between India and us. One day, Dr. Ahluwalia was in a meeting, and the Prime Minister was there. And then somebody said, but continuity of policy is a problem, right? This is a question I hear often from business people. They say governments change, policies change, tax policies change, export policies change, so many things change, and that's why Sri Lanka can't really sustain development. And the answer the Prime Minister gave, he said, well, I am change, and then pointed to Dr. Ahluwalia and said, right, that is no change. It continues. My point here is Sri Lanka and India, the difference is we don't have an independent public sector. Us as a party, we are looking very closely at that because we think Sri Lanka needs an independent public sector so that there could be policy continuation.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have one of the hot topics in the country right now is regarding the IMF program and whether there is space to renegotiate any aspect of this IMF program. So before I come to the other members of parliament on stage, I'd like to come back to Dr. Ahluwalia and then shift to Dr. Nishan Dimel. Dr. Ahluwalia, can you give us your experience of IMF programs and renegotiating IMF programs? What do you understand by renegotiating as well? So if you could give us a little bit of ideas on that.
Well, fortunately, we never had to renegotiate a program, but though that very often happens. So if you're in our case, we were in fact originally thinking in 91 that we would need a second program because we thought that the first one would finish by the end of 93, and then we would need a second program. And we were fortunate, we were lucky, the world economy was doing well, and we got a lot of response to our initial steps. And this confidence was restored, basically. And we had to tell the IMF that, look, thanks very much for discussing with us a possible second program, but we don't need it. So we didn't have that problem. But I think the critical thing, in case you need a second program. Remember, we never had a debt servicing problem. So, you know, we didn't have to restructure. You're restructuring your debt, and there's an assumption that the external environment will improve sufficiently that when the repayment on the restructured debt begins, you will be able to make that payment. Now, there have been cases in the past, for example, Greece, which, you know, they just weren't able to do it. So if you have to renegotiate the program, I mean, that's what the IMF is for, and they paid quite a lot. So they realize, but you know, at the time when you have to go for renegotiation, they have to be able to say that, well, Sri Lanka did what it was possible to do. So I think if you end up simply saying that, look, we can't do any of these things we promised, and therefore let's start again, there won't be much support from the staff. Now, you may be able politically at a higher level to get the staff also to change, but that's where, I mean, in a way, smaller countries have less leverage. Bigger countries have more leverage. So I think the strategy to follow is to make sure that 2 years from now, in case you need more assistance, both the IMF and the World Bank were able to say, well, you know, Sri Lanka has made a really good set of progress in what they promised. I think you'll find that these organizations are there to lend money. So they're not there not to lend money. So if they can make a reasonable case that, yes, reforms are taking place, they would be quite realistic. You know, any assumption about whether a particular program is good enough is based on arbitrary assumptions about what's going to happen in the world. I mean, if the world trade doesn't grow the way the IMF expected, that'll be a very good reason for Sri Lanka to say, look, we just need more time. And you know, this whole issue, I'm now stepping a little back, I think there's a lot of sympathy, and there should be, on the part of countries, or rather people, that when a country is pushed into default, it's not just the problem of the country, it's also the weakness of the lenders. I mean, when a company goes into default, I mean, the lenders lose their money. Here, what is happening is it's being assumed that somehow we'll be able to help the country to repay all its debt by restructuring it, and there's not enough of a haircut. And that is an issue that has been before the international community for quite some time. And the only haircuts that take place are when the lenders collectively agree. And generally, when they are well disposed, they recognize it at the official level. But if you have a lot of debt to the private sector, those fellows don't. Because they realize that, you know, you have a lot, as it were, to lose. And their strategy would be to say, there's no case for, you know, a haircut on private loans or bonds. Let the official fellows do more. Well, you don't care who does it. But I think it raises the question, any assumption of debt restructuring is based on a reason, on it being enough, is based on some assumption about how much the country can do if it follows the right policies. And if it follows those policies more or less, and is not in a position, then in retrospect, there should have been a bigger haircut. Now, you may not actually get the private sector to agree to a haircut, but then the IMF can be made to restructure and give you more time. This is a big weakness in the international monetary system. And since 2001, it's been argued that we need an agreement on how to handle debt restructuring, and they have not been able to reach an agreement.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahluwalia. That's very interesting. So I'd like to just pose that to Dr. Nishant. So if I understand correctly, what he means is before renegotiating, we have to show the IMF that we have been able to perform along with the parameters provided, that we've met the targets, etc. And while commenting on that, could you also just comment on what Dr. Ahluwalia mentioned regarding the debt restructuring, and will we have to go back regarding that agreement as well? Dr. Nishant.
Thank you, Kusum. So this is going to be a slightly longer answer. I'll start by responding to Iran to say not just an independent public service, but a professional public service. This is a critical factor. You can't have a public service that is less competent than the IMF, than the private sector, and expect it to succeed for your country. So we have to invest in building the best possible public service we can get. And we had a relatively good public service in the past. I'll tell you why, with an anecdote that connects to the IMF. A friend of mine was on the IMF team that went into South Korea when the East Asian crisis happened in the 97-98. You know, that was one of the fastest debt restructurings you ever saw in a country, and South Korea never looked back and went ahead. My friend says when they arrived at the Ministry of Finance, off the plane, first arrival of the IMF team, the South Korean bureaucrats put on the table a program, fully designed in the formats, written in the formats used by the IMF, with all the templates in place, the strategies in place, the targets, and the outcomes described, and said, you don't need to do anything. We've designed our own program, and we can go ahead. Within 2 weeks, it went to IMF board for approval, and IMF program started. Because the bureaucrats didn't ask the IMF to design their economic strategy. You don't ask, I mean, lots of private sector here, which one of you asks your banker to write your business plan? And if you did, your banker should really be worried, right? You need to write your business plan, you need to know your strategy, and you need to convince the IMF, of course, that acts like an umpire, just like a banker says, look, I will fund this, I will give you this loan because I think it's a strong business plan. Sri Lanka needs the capability to do that, and when we do that, I think we get a better plan in place. Because poor IMF guys, there's so much about Sri Lanka they don't understand. Just like the banker, they're not going to write you a good enough business plan most of the time. On the renegotiation question, I will break it up in this way, and currently it's a little more complicated for Sri Lanka because we have two sets of targets and two sets of methods in play. One is a target for debt restructuring. The other is a target for fiscal targets. So two sets, fiscal targets, debt restructuring targets. You have two sets of methods. You have fiscal methods, that the method is not the same as the target. It's very important to understand that. And then you have governance methods, because the IMF and most of civil society in Sri Lanka, and I trust business too, understands full well that Sri Lanka doesn't simply fail because it doesn't have all the right economic policies or actions, but also because governance is hopelessly compromising the ability to get the economy on the right path. Governance is a foundation, and if you build on the sand without the foundation, your house comes tumbling down. You go to the IMF for the 17th time. So two sets of methods, two sets of targets, and I think where you can and can't negotiate works like this. After you have sat and worked with the IMF to come up with the targets, and you've designed a program, it's hard to renegotiate the targets because a lot of time and effort has been spent, and there's a negotiation involved in doing that, but after that's done, that's often considered done. But the methods to achieve those targets get renegotiated all the time. Every 6 months, in fact, when there's a disbursement, you will see, even in Sri Lanka, that the program changes quite a bit. Now, it's happened in the last 2 years. We had, for instance, initially a method of having a 15% VAT. That got renegotiated by the IMF to an 18% VAT. Sri Lanka agreed to automatically index excise taxation that applies to tobacco, alcohol, other things like that. Somehow Sri Lanka renegotiated and removed the indexation on excise taxation and said, we don't want to do it. There was property taxes in the program, and that got renegotiated to an imputed rental income tax. So I can keep going. There was the idea that Sri Lanka will take away not have discretion in giving tax exemptions. As you know, that tax exemptions and concessions counted in, according to the government, about 50% of revenue was lost in tax exemptions and concessions. And IMF said, look, here's a method for governance. You don't give discretion to your ministers in giving tax exemptions. In this last review, Sri Lanka renegotiated and said, no, we are going to keep that discretion. So I can keep going, but the program, the methods have to get renegotiated, sometimes for the interests of the country and sometimes for vested interests. But because you may want to be learning all the time and figuring out what is the best method to get to the targets. So I think we have to separate out these two things. Now, if you find, as Montek says, as you go along, that maybe you set the targets incorrectly. Maybe you agreed to too little debt restructuring. That's a more serious renegotiation. And perhaps it needs to be done for the sake of long-term sustainability, but it only can only be done on the basis of good analysis that you put on the table. And for instance, Sri Lanka would have to ask for a new debt sustainability analysis if it wanted to renegotiate the targets. And then on the basis of a professionally done newer debt sustainability analysis, discuss whether the targets need to be amended. It can't be done on whim, right? And the methods must also be subject to, that's why I said professional bureaucracy, professional analysis to say, when we set these methods, we're going to hit the targets. Now, Sri Lanka has had a weakness in that. Last year, Sri Lanka said, here's the revenue we are going to make in 2023. I know some of you all were at our public finance lounge. 1 month after the budget in December 2022, we said this target, just do the math, it's going to be missed by 11% or 12%. We settled on 12 a month later. The target was missed by 13%. Government thought they were going to miss it by 17 when they put this year's budget. What I'm saying is that target wasn't missed because some unforeseen thing happened. Just the simple math that we were doing, we were able to predict or project that the target's going to be missed. But we continued with a method that was going to not succeed, and then we didn't succeed. And then you've got to come up and increase VAT and do all kinds of other things now to see how do you get at the target. So having really a professional, analytically driven set of policies that can achieve the targets, and making sure the targets are written not by your banker, but by a professional bureaucracy, and if necessary, as Montek says, renegotiated to make sure that this is going to deliver long-term sustainability of the country. I think that's the way to go. So renegotiation should not be considered some kind of crime. I mean, it is the way to optimize, okay? Because you it's like, I'll end with this. If you're going to get on a journey, you might roughly know where you want to get to, but as you're moving, you don't get into Gall Road and put your car on cruise control. You've got to be, it's a dynamic process. You're constantly alert and adjusting to the traffic, adjusting to what is happening on the road, and making sure that you are finding the best routes and best paths to get to where you're going, and driving an economy is like that. You don't just agree to some program, some methods one time, and then close your eyes and just keep implementing it. You've got to be adjusting to what's going on, how it is working out, what new information you're getting, and optimizing that program all the time. So I would say renegotiation thought like that is a really positive thing, and we should look at it in that way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nishan. Dr. Ahluwalia, you want to come back on that?
I just wanted to pitch in because as the discussion went on, there's one aspect of our experience that I want to share. When we negotiated the 91 agreement, we had already depreciated the rupee by 24% in 2 stages. So the IMF wasn't actually looking for anything else on the exchange rate. But internally, we had made up our minds that we were actually going to go to a market-determined, fully flexible exchange rate in 2 steps. First, a dual exchange rate, and then a fully flexible one. Now, since there was no such thing in the program, when I consulted with the IMF guys, I said, look, we're going to do it this way. It's not part of our program, but you will agree that moving to a fully flexible exchange rate is a good thing. And they were, of course, delighted. But I said we're going to do it in 2 steps. First, a sort of a dual exchange rate, and very quickly thereafter unify. And so there was a consultation with the IMF. They felt that we were sharing with them our intention, and they also felt that we were doing more than what the program required, which they were pleased about. That's where I would say that, in your case, there are some things that you're going to do which you believe you need to do anyway, okay? If you need to do a renegotiation, it's a good idea to build goodwill by doing more in this area to begin with. I mean, the best area, in my view, would be reducing duties and making the exchange rate flexible. I mean, that goes down very well in the contemporary notion that the country wants to become open, it's lowering duties, adopting a flexible exchange rate. And that also helps remittances. Because, people who are remitting money get a better deal if the exchange rate is more flexible.
Thank you, sir. May I come to Honorable Sujiva Senasinghe, and since Dr. Nishan mentioned the fiscal targets that we've been given. So fiscal targets means that everybody here has to pay higher taxes. So from a political as well as the economic angle, Sri Lanka has to reach tax to GDP of around 15% according to the IMF. 15% tax to GDP seems a little low for a country like Sri Lanka. I think India has something closer to 20%. But at the same time, the Sri Lankan people are already heavily burdened with, VAT, income taxes, etc. And I think a Sri Lankan population that's not really used to having such a robust tax system either. So can you discuss this issue of the impact on people's lives of this higher taxes, but also the necessity to improve our tax to GDP ratio?
Yeah, when we spoke to the IMF, what we learned, they are willing to listen to us. And our tax to GDP is about 13% at the moment. So what we told them is we can't kill the goose and we can't expect to raise taxes and get taxes from them, especially the business community and the exporters. So what we told them, we can expand the tax web. It's about 1 million taxpayers in the country at the moment. And I believe that we increased up to about 1.7 million during our government, and it came back to about 1 million. So by introducing technology and new methods, we can expand the tax web and take it up to about 2 million taxpayers. With that, we can increase up to about $4 billion we can have extra without burdening the businessman, without kind of killing the businessman. So the IMF actually agreed with us. I said if we raise taxes on exporters, and if we discourage them, they might move into other markets like India and Bangladesh. So they understood our concerns. So what we told them was, renegotiating definitely about 4 months ago when we were discussing, we anticipated a haircut of about 35%. And when we calculated, it came from the external debt from about 42 billion to about 25 billion. So we were very optimistic that the external debt, it would come down to 25 billion, but the government didn't negotiate on that. They concentrated more on the election, so they kind of missed out on the opportunity. So we'll have to aggressively work on a haircut for sure, because 45 billion, it will increase. Another 3 years' time, it will accumulate, the interest will accumulate, and it will be over 50 billion. So I think that's a bit of a off target for us. If we aggressively talk to them, what I understood, when you talk to IMF, they are willing to negotiate. But they are not going to put words in our mouth. We have to talk to them and we have to push them and say that this is, because we have to, end of the day, we have to pay the debt. So as the doctor said, for us to pay the debt, we have to first survive. And if we don't get our economy right, they know that we can't pay anything. So for us to pay something, they know if you negotiate properly, they know that by helping us. But what happens is if you don't negotiate, if you don't push them, they will just merely, they are bankers, then economists will put a system. That system, what happened with the government, they just took the system. And I believe the president didn't concentrate much on that because his focus was on the election. So we missed out on a golden opportunity to get a haircut because most of the countries, Zimbabwe got about 35% haircut. Another country got about, I think about, I forget the country, about 28%. So we missed out on that golden opportunity when we are struggling. But now what happens is now they think we are normal, we are come to normalcy. So they'll be now reluctant to give a haircut on us, thinking that we are getting stable. But actually, we are not there yet. So again, we have to tell them we are barely kind of surviving, but you need to help us for us to pay the debt. You have to help us because it was only China, I believe, was not coming into the table and kind of agreeing for the haircut. So I think strongly, as a government, tell them that we have a transparent and a trustworthy government. Zero tolerance of corruption as well. With that, with the policy, I think with proof that we'll do well in the future, we might be able to negotiate. That's the understanding I had when I spoke to them.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Nishan, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, because you said, we don't like paying higher taxes and IMF wants us to raise tax to GDP, I want to come in to just point out that the way to raise tax to GDP is not by asking people to pay higher taxes, but by doing a better job at collecting the taxes from more people. So I think Sujiva said quite rightly that the number of tax files today is significantly less than what they were in 2019. India has had similar, and actually South Asia on average, Verite research shows, has had similar rates of corporate taxes, but collected twice as much in tax to GDP from corporates as Sri Lanka, because we are busy perhaps giving lots and lots of tax holidays and concessions or not appropriately collecting. So while Sri Lanka collects 1.2% of GDP from corporates, India collects maybe 2.4% of GDP with the same tax rates. India, with state and central tax collection, gets about 19% of GDP in taxes. And it's a poorer country. So if India, being a poorer country with similar or lower tax rates, can collect almost 20% of GDP in taxes, that's not a high target for Sri Lanka. It's just about how you do it. And the fact that you collect it, not that you keep increasing the tax rate on the few that are paying it. That's a bad idea. And we've come up with methods like having withholding tax, which is an easy way to collect from a large number, and having a proper system to refund that tax if people have too much has been collected from them. So there are lots of methods to do it. We just need to come back to Iran's point of a professional administration that you focus on, getting the job done properly. Otherwise, I think there will be resistance to increasing the taxes, as you say.
And I think the individual's spending is not monitored also properly in Sri Lanka. So if you have a system like a QR code, when you go abroad, that is entered. When you spend in some other place, that is entered. When you buy a car, because it's not monitored in Sri Lanka properly. So it's easy to get away from the tax web. So we have to use technology and make sure that everybody is in it.
Thank you, sir. And may I now bring in Honourable Member of Parliament Harshan Rajakaruna. We've just been talking about taxation, and everybody here understands that we are all paying more tax today than we did a year ago, and we will be probably paying a little more tax in a few months' time. But Mr. Rajakaruna, if you can just tell us, you spend a lot of time in the grassroots in Sri Lanka, and you understand the concerns of people. A lot of questions I've received today also pertain to this point that even though the public are paying more and more taxes, there seems to be very little action from the government regarding corruption, regarding reducing their expenditure, regarding rationalizing themselves. So how do you view this dynamic? Because it seems that the people are being asked to make significant sacrifices. Are we seeing those same sacrifices and hard decisions taken by the government to benefit the people?
I think as all of us agree, the biggest problem is, or one of the biggest problems is corruption. So to eliminate corruption, the willingness, political willingness to eliminate corruption is the most important thing. It's just not one thing, but you have to have that political willingness. And we have not seen in the previous, even in the incumbent government, that it's happening. I mean, they say, okay, we are going to bring this act or few other acts. But when you have formed a government with the most corrupt people in parliament, I don't think people will believe that it will ever happen. So political willingness is number one. And I believe the SJB leader is willing to take that action. And also, we have to have these independent institutions, just not the namesake independent. We have to have these independent institutions actually independent. For example, Attorney General's Department. Now, Attorney General's Department there's a conflict of interest. They are representing the government and even the president. So we have to have not only that, we have to have independent prosecution system where it is not politically influenced. And also these other independent institutions, for example, bribery, police commission, and so on, they have to have that independence. And for all of that, it's a political willingness. If you appoint your closest associates for these positions, we will never get this result. So, like I said, political willingness will be the key reason.
Thank you very much, sir. May I bring in the leader of the opposition on that track? Because I think the IMF released its first ever governance diagnostic report, one of the first for Sri Lanka, the diagnostic report. The report itself pointed out several threats to governance. One of them was that the president holding the portfolio of the Minister of Finance is a huge threat to governance and to our governance system. And even at the point of the IMF publishing this report, Sri Lanka's president was holding the portfolio of the Minister of Finance. So, and we also, Dr. Ahluwalia talks about political will. So I'd like you to put these two things together in a future SJB government. For example, if you were the president, would you also hold the Minister of Finance, that portfolio? Do you think that is a good way to go forward? And what do you think about this idea of having political will, more than even the technical knowledge, having the political will to bring in reform? So would you mind touching on those two things, sir?
I think as far as appointments are concerned, the prerogative of making the appointments, we should follow the Constitution. The Constitution provides for the various provisions, through the various provisions, as to how the appointment process can take place. I don't think it's necessary for us to obtain advice from any other source with regard to making appointments as far as the Sri Lankan government is concerned. But what is most important is that we make those appointments in a justifiable manner. The appointments should be justiciable and justifiable. We should be able to answer to the people. So we need to appoint people with knowledge, qualification, experience, knowledge of the subject matter, proficiency. So there are a variety of benchmarks that we will adopt when it comes to making appointments. I also believe that we should look at the anti-corruption programs, measures, from a different perspective. The various legislation that are in place right now, promoting measures to stifle corrupt activities, I personally think that those institutions, in order to guard their independence, I would say it's very important to enshrine those anti-corruption institutions and the various other tools and instruments and measures in the Constitution itself as an entrenched clause, so that those who are involved in the promotion of anti-corrupt activities and measures, that they are truly independent. When anti-corruption institutions are standalone institutions and they're guaranteed by entrenched provisions in the Constitution, you're less susceptible to change. Now, acts of parliament you can change. You only need a simple majority. Of course, in exceptional circumstances, you may need a two-thirds plus a referendum. But I think the anti-corruption institutions must be safeguarded. The personnel involved in carrying out the duties, their independence must be protected by providing them with the security of an entrenched clause in the Constitution which cannot be easily changed. Something akin to fundamental rights, so that as governments change, they may decide to change the requisite legislation. Now, that won't happen if these anti-corruption institutions and the relevant stipulated clauses are enshrined and protected as an entrenched clause in the Constitution.
Thank you very much, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are reaching 9 o'clock, and that is the deadline I've been given. So, on this last section of questions, I'd like to ask all of the panelists to just come in on an essential aspect, and I'll start with Mr. Krishna Kumar. Even if it comes to Sri Lanka's debt sustainability, our revenue projections, our fiscal targets, everything depends on growth. Sri Lanka needs to grow. The economy has to grow and has to start immediately. So maybe we can have a short, brief understanding from each of our panelists on how they would advise Sri Lanka on future growth and use their own experience to enlighten us with this. So, Mr. Krishna Kumar, can we start with you?
See, I've had the privilege of being in India in business when we used to grow at what was then called the Hindu rate of growth of 2 to 3%. And I've had the privilege when the growth got accelerated. The biggest difference I've seen as a business professional is that we started looking outward instead of inward. We looked at becoming competitive with the outside world, the global world, accepting it as a reality rather than living in isolation. And that was the change which I saw, and that is the change I believe which fueled growth and continues to fuel growth in India.
Thank you. Honorable Aran Wickramaratne, may I put the same question to you? What do you see as key to Sri Lanka's growth over the next 5 to 10 years?
I would say just opening up the system. I said there are many, many examples, but I use tourism as an example. We'll open this up. People, 100 countries, they could come in without visas. What's the problem? I think it's a mindset issue. I'm arguing the case strongly. Let's open it up, because I think that's absolutely critical. Our foreign policy, we are going to be an independent country, independent foreign policy, but we are going to be multi-aligned. The world has changed. 2 weeks ago, I was in Delhi just for a day and met the Minister of Sustainable Energy in Delhi. And I was talking with him, and they were talking about energy. and having a common energy program for the region. India has arrangements with Bhutan, with Nepal, with Bangladesh, not with Sri Lanka as yet. And I just told him, I said, there's a big, small problem in negotiations. We are all small. We've been small, I said, for 2,000 years. We continue to be. And I said, when I went to school, I was always worried about the US and Europe. They were the big ones. Now it is India and China. And so I smilingly told him that, we need to have a multilateral arrangement. And then he smiled because I was saying big, small. I said, when I was going to school, you were aligned to the USSR. We were more pro-West. But today I said we are both on the same side. So we need to come to this arrangement. He smiled. He understood. He said, yes, I really clearly hear you. So I said, when we are doing this arrangement, we'll look at a multilateral arrangement. My point is this. Sri Lanka's foreign policy, one major pillar is going to be the economy. The economy is going to be a major pillar in our foreign policy. 75% of all foreign policy appointments will be professionals. The SJB has taken this decision. There will be only a few people who will be appointed outside that. And we will make sure that our embassies are open to push our economic cause, economic diplomacy. So we're going in one direction. Open policies, opening our borders. I like what was said today. The FTA is an opportunity which has been underexploited, that Sri Lanka can use, particularly to help our relationship with India, and then look at India as a market. What we can manufacture here, we will manufacture. What can't be manufactured here can be manufactured in India. We'll open the doors that our businessmen could actually do that, because there are lots of competitive reasons why we should do that. I think the biggest barrier I see is really a mindset barrier. If we open our mind, I think the economic problem can be solved. But we have to make the shift in our minds that it's a multi-alignment. Investors are invited from any country in our policy. They can come from anywhere. But we have to go where the markets are. And the demand is clearly in South Asia, the biggest subcontinent in the world, the fastest growing subcontinent in the world. And if we clearly understand this, I think the SJB is going in the right direction. Its final point I would make is this. It's finally a matter of trust. Even when you're negotiating, it's a matter of trust. And therefore, we certainly will make sure that there is trust. And I was talking about foreign policy. No relative will be appointed to any of these diplomatic positions. Sajith Premadasa has set the example, and we will make sure that we will not be doing that. I think these are the things that we need to correct in our country. The economy will correct itself. The rule of law will prevail. It doesn't matter who it is, the rule of law will prevail. Everybody will be treated equal before the law. We are going a new journey, creating a new Sri Lanka. And the SJB is a new political party, and we are very conscious of the issues even Harshan referred to on corruption. We will make sure that it will be minimized, and that we will uphold the independence of the judiciary. And I'm shocked at some of the things that have happened recently. We clearly believe in the philosophy that the executive, the legislator, and the judiciary are independent from each other.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
So I want to join in to answer this question. You inquired as to how we are going to grow. First and foremost, what is the most important requirement to grow? We believe that private enterprise is the engine, the dynamo that drives growth. That's the first point. So having identified and defined that, we have to look at obstacles to growth. So what are the obstacles? Lack of a favorable economic environment. to grow. So we have to make sure that an environment that encourages growth, a propitious environment, macroeconomic stability, and also that we have the requisite skill set that would provide the necessary human resources for the incoming investors. That's also very important. So we will have to have mass-scale changes in our education system, and we will make those changes to ensure that the Sri Lankan education system caters to the international labor market needs, and that our curricula and syllabi are designed according to the supply and demand aspects of the international labor market. We need to encourage the ease with which business can be done. So all aspects of the ease of doing business indices, we have to be at the highest level. And basically, we have to improve on our FDI. Look, foreign investors are not going to come to Sri Lanka just because they feel sorry for our country. They will decide, why should we choose Sri Lanka over and above India, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore? So we have to make sure that those factors which will swing the opinion of the practitioners of foreign direct investment, that they will come to Sri Lanka. So we have to make sure that we create the requisite environment to do so. We should provide incentives for exporters. We should provide incentives to the manufacturing industry, the tourism sector. The agricultural sector has to be more modernized. We have to have, since a large portion of our workforce is engaged in agriculture, a greater contribution of agriculture to GDP. But that's not happening. We have to make agriculture more efficient. Make sure that there is bang per buck. So, growth can be attained through a government that facilitates growth, a government that creates the requisite conditions for growth. Let me just give you one example of the type of imbalanced growth that we have in our country. Do you know, contribution of Western province to GDP is 42%. So one province provides a 42% contribution to GDP. So the other 8 provinces has to share the 58. So we have the northern province less than 5%, eastern province less than 5%, central close to 10, northwest close to 10, so on and so forth. So when we talk of growth, we have to make sure that there is a geographical balance in growth. So let me get an example from the 200 garment factory program, which was initiated by my late father. Now, coming back to today's situation, you know, this instrument of tax incentives and tax exemptions have today become a dirty word in Sri Lanka's economic vocabulary. In actual fact, tax incentives is an important policy tool, is an important policy instrument to encourage investors. So during the 200 garment factory program, as you moved away from the metropolis, as you moved away from the capital towards the periphery, you got more and more advantages. This is very much similar to the enterprise zone policy followed by Margaret Thatcher when she took over the government in the UK from Prime Minister Callaghan, when Britain was known as the poor man of Europe. So through the enterprise zone policy, as you moved away from London, businesses who were willing to set up shop, in fact, the enterprise zone policy had categorized geographically depressed areas, most depressed areas, affluent areas, so on and so forth. So depending on that categorization, you received incentives. You received favorable tax rates. You received tax holidays. You know, with the 200 garment factory program, the investors received a duty-free permit. Those days they used to get it was called an intercooler those days. So those incentives were given because this whole process is a symbiotic process. So investors come and set up businesses, it helps the economy, it helps the employment rates, and so on and so forth, and creates the local economic multiplier. And the same token, those businesses receive the necessary incentives to earn profit and to reinvest those profit, expansion of manufacturing facilities. So I think there are a multiplicity of policy tools and instruments that will encourage growth, and we as an administration are eagerly looking forward to implement those policies and bring about inclusive growth and shared prosperity.
Thank you very much, sir. May I ask Honorable Rajkarna also just to come briefly on the growth topic, and we'll come to the end of our panel here.
Yeah. To grow, I think we all have to come together as Sri Lankans, not a Tamil, a Muslim, or a Sinhalese. I think it's very important that we are all treated equally. I can't imagine another situation we are divided as, can you remember Dr. Shafi's issue? Can you believe there was Vanda Satkam, Vanda Peti, Vanda Kottu? That was a time not far away. So the day that we respect each ethnicity and continue to grow as Sri Lankans, I think that is the day that we can really grow.
Thank you, sir. So I'll come to Mr. Senasinghe next, and then Dr. Nishan, and I'll ask Dr. Ahluwalia to finish us off with the panel. So.
Being a bankrupt country, I think we have a huge silver lining. If we take the human indicators in Sri Lanka, literacy rate is about 95. In India, it was in 94, it was 95, Sri Lanka. In India, it's about, I believe, 76. And life expectancy is, in Sri Lanka is about 76 males and females 80. In India, it's about 67. In Bangladesh, about 71. So we have a good platform. And we are a small country and we can pick up and run. So I believe the policies will get it right. There are eminent personalities where we discussed, and I believe we should be able to get the policies right. We should be able to talk to IMF and get things moving forward. I think with all that, we need a strong leader. A leader who's not corrupt. I have first-hand experience being in a ministry. If you're straightforward, if you're not corrupt, our officials are very efficient and they follow you. But if you're corrupt, they also become corrupt. So if you have a strong leader who's not corrupt, I believe, I'm not saying because he's next to me, I have 100% trust in him that he has zero tolerance for corruption. And that's the best thing that I see in him. And I don't normally praise him in front of him. But with that leadership, if we have 15 to 20 solid, efficient, you have to be efficient also. And I remember when I was given the task to have an industrial zone, they said it will take 6 years. I did it in 8 months. Because I've seen my predecessors, Gamin Disanaika, and those are the people we have been watching. But we have never got opportunity. From 94, we have not got opportunity. So I think this is the best opportunity we are getting. And we have a young, uncorrupt, clean leader. And with that, with all the policies, we need this efficient set of a cabinet. I think we can pull it through within about 5 years. I think we might give a good fight to India as well.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Nishan, over to you.
Thank you, Kusum. Because the Professionals Association invited me as an independent economist to this panel, I'll give you an economist answer. When we talk about growth, economists always look at three things. They look at capital, labor, and technology, and how you mix those three things up. So technology really is part of how you mix capital and labor to get more out of it than you would without technology. So growth in technology is very important, but I'll come to that. So the first thing with capital is that Sri Lanka's government is in a debt crisis. It is borrowing most of your savings, and if we are trying to bring more capital, we've got to figure out ways to bring external foreign investment in, because we are short of it here. Our savings are just not enough, and we've been short of foreign investment for a long time, even while we're giving tax concessions. So what we are missing, I think, and often said in the literature, is that foreign investment is not just looking for tax breaks. They're looking for governments that they can trust, that are consistent in their policies, that maintain rule of law, that maintain a level playing field, so that they know that once they invest in a business, another guy is not going to come and do the same business with a different set of tax obligations. So these things are very important to build the kind of confidence, enforceability of contracts. These are the things where Sri Lanka is struggling to improve, to bring investment, and getting investment in is one of the things we have to do to improve capital. Second, on labor, you know, it's fascinating how Sri Lanka has been going on this path of encouraging Sri Lankans to go abroad and send remittances. A very short-term view. Because if you don't bring back labor, then you are going to have a problem for growth. So Sri Lanka has to move into a model, not where we kind of, think that we are completely hopeless and send people out of the country and hope they will send charity back, but to actually keep people in the country and put them into employment in productive ways that grow the country, especially since we're going through a demographic transition. We really need to find ways to bring our labor back and bring Sri Lankans to work. Technology means, there are two ways you get it: as dispersion from other countries and from the neighborhood. You can get it. You can also invest a lot more of your labor in R&D to improve the technology by which you work. Agriculture is a classic area where, unlike most East Asian countries that grew, our agriculture has not been through a productivity transformation. So you have 25% of the labor force roughly producing less than 8% of GDP. That never works for growth. So agriculture has to go through a productivity transformation that may be putting the right kind of R&D to work, like others have done, and it's possible. I'll end by saying this. When we say technology, it's not just digitization or AI, and we mustn't get too taken away. It's sometimes hard science, it's solutions to problems, but it's also the technology of government. Government has a critical role to play, because it is government that finally creates the environment that's enabling. I think the leader of the opposition said it. So the first thing is government must take away obstacles. We found that, when you want to be a small-time exporter, you've got to go to 10 different places, an arduous process that takes a very long time just to be registered as an exporter. That makes no sense. Government not only takes away obstacles, but they must create a positively enabling environment. That's a critical function of government. You know, Kusum, in Sri Lanka, there's a WTO trade facilitation sort of benchmarks. And in 2017, Sri Lanka had completed of these benchmarks 29%. By 2023, we were at 31.5%, so a 2.5 percentage point improvement. The least developed countries in the world, the least, under $1,000 per capita, had 27.8 done in 2017, so similar to Sri Lanka. They went to 41.4 on average by 2023, so they had a 13.5% increase. The developing countries, still poorer than Sri Lanka, so under 2,000, went from 59.7, so they were already far ahead, to 79.7, at 20%. So all the other countries and governments are creating more enabling environments for their exporters and their businesses, but Sri Lanka is failing to do so. So creating an enabling environment is the technology of government, right? And of course, providing the kind of public goods and infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I don't mean just building roads, it's public transport. Doing the things that reduce the cost of people doing business and producing, so that capital, labor can come together with better technology in research, science, and other methods, but also better technology of government. Which is why I think we care about elections. We care about elections to ask, what is the technology of government that will be put into place, because the growth doesn't come from government. It's not fiscal stimulus, it's not monetary stimulus that creates growth. Those are the short-term measures to tide over business cycles. They're not growth creators. Growth comes from people, from human beings, who must be allowed and given the environment to get to work, and that is the job of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nishan. Dr. Ahluwalia, will close with you.
Thank you. This is an awesome responsibility after a panel that has been so wide-ranging. I'm very encouraged by what I heard all the panelists say. I mean, I have no doubt that if the new government, when it's in place, pushes for a higher growth, which is being currently talked about, a growth that is inclusive, a growth that is sustainable, a growth that's private sector led, a growth that actually is based on a lot of improvement in human development and human capital, which is actually going to be critical, and also combined with efforts to improve rule of law, corruption, trust in government. I mean, that's fantastic. And it's going to be difficult to do, but you know what would be good is whoever is running the government, if this is the broad idea, it would be a good idea to have an independent feedback, set up a mechanism where you can get an independent feedback on how much progress has actually been made in each of these things. You know, the government bodies that you entrust to do something, I mean, in all well-meaning way, they will say, yes, we're making progress. I mean, that would be true in any government. But it would be useful to have some external body that a year later reports back to the president that these are the wonderful things that you outlined, and our assessment is this is the progress we've made. You can be sure that it won't be 100% in each, but you know, if a significant amount of progress is made in each of these areas, I've no doubt that you'll see a very good outcome for Sri Lanka. So thank you for inviting me, and I learned a lot. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our panel a round of applause, and thank you very much for your patience. The time is 9:20, and I think we have some refreshments waiting for you outside as well. So thanks again, and have yourself a pleasant week. Thank you.
Dinava minde heta dina itihasa gatai le arambuma Mage rata bala ganvannata sarasen Diyunuwa yali kendannata sarasen Samagiya bala ganvaniti sarasen Sri Lanka vamadiriyen sarasen Pirisidu kalim Tarita